In a country like Nigeria, there will be no development, there will be no prosperity, and there will be chaos. And once government do not fulfill its agreement, there is no reason why it will impose no work, no pay. That is an act of injustice.
On the Profile Interview segment this week, I'll be speaking with the General Secretary of the Non-Academic Staff Union of Universities, NASU. It tells me it's of utmost importance for the federal government and relevant stakeholders to review the no work, no pay policy, as this affects industrial harmony in the sector. It's good to have you on the program.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations on a successful outing at the National Executive Council meeting of NASU.
Thank you very much.
Very quickly, we go ahead to the conversation of the day, which is centered on collective bargaining agreement. We know that collective bargaining agreement is sacrosanct towards ensuring that the welfare of your members is being taken care of. Can you bring us up to speed on how members of NASU have been faring?
The issue of collective bargaining agreements in the sector we operate appear to have been clearly having some problems. You are well aware that we operate in the universities, inter-university centers, polytechnics, colleges of education, research institutes, and a few others. And proud to this moment, we had collective bargaining agreements in universities and inter-university center. We had in the polytechnic. We also had in the colleges of education, as well as research institutes. And those collective bargaining agreements fell due for renegotiation 5 years after that negotiation was concluded. One was concluded in about 3 of them were concluded in 2009, and one was concluded in 2010. So if things had worked properly, those renegotiations would have taken place in 2014 and 2015. But unfortunately, it is only now that we can say seriously the government, who is our employers in those sectors, are now talking, federal government are now talking about the renegotiation. Other efforts that have been made for this renegotiation to hold did not materialize, didn't succeed. The government now said they have now constituted the yearly committee to negotiate with universities and inter-university centers, negotiate with polytechnics and colleges of education unions. And this is where we are. The fact that the government did not keep to the agreement of renegotiating after 5 years has also created some tension and industrial instability in our institutions, which is clearly unfortunate. So we've not really had it very good when it comes to the issue of collective bargaining in our tertiary institutions.
Talking about the financial aspect, funding of education is a very big deal across the globe. What would be the recommendation of NASU towards telling stakeholders, recommendation of NASU towards ensuring that stakeholders fund education properly?
You see, the truth of the matter is that we have heard about the UNESCO benchmark of 26% of annual budget. But realistically, as trade unions who are also deeply involved in knowing, deeply knowledgeable about what government is saddled with in terms of responsibilities, we do not think that this 26% of the UNESCO benchmark can really be fulfilled because of the competing natures of funding. Because you have to fund health, fund agri, fund a lot of things. But we think realistically, the government can move from what they are allocating now. This year, it's just 7-point-something% of the national budget. I think that this government, we will canvass that government should move from what they are doing now to about 15% of the annual budget. That will show that as unions, we are also very patriotic. We understand the responsibility and the numerous issues that the government is contending with, particularly the problem of insecurity that is consuming so much money. I mean, it's only when you live securely that you can also be talking of other things. We are very mindful of government responsibilities, and that is why we will not outrageously insist that the UNESCO benchmark should be followed by government. At least if government can move now from 7 point something to about 15%, that will be like 100% increase, and it will touch on some of the areas that are not adequately touched right now. And then we will also canvass as trade unions that allocations are also monitored. The way these allocations are expended by management, various institutions, are also monitored so that we don't just give room for corruption. Because when money allocated are not utilized for the purposes for which they are supposed to be used for, then it becomes a problem. And the criticism will fall back on government as against those who are manipulating the fund. So I think we canvass very seriously that more attention should be focused on how funds released to tertiary institutions should be monitored, so that at least more progress can be achieved. As more money is being released, more progress can be achieved. Government will not be under unnecessary condemnation by those who don't understand the workings of that is going on there.
You also lead at the Public Service International, and with your exposure and experience, I would like you to speak on the global cut jobs and also the issue of unemployment and underemployment that most workers are experiencing across the globe.
The truth of the matter is that in Europe, the issue of job cut, unemployment, and some of these problems are being addressed. It may not be at the level that we wanted it addressed, but you can see clearly that there are efforts. And the rate of unemployment is being reduced. But the unfortunate thing is that in this part of the world, when I now talk about Africa and Arab countries, where I have the authority of PSI to supervise, we find that there are numerous crises that are aggravating this problem. One of these problems is this war that is going on in Gaza and that part of the world, which has rendered quite a lot of people unemployed, rendered them homeless. Two is the problem of corruption. Corruption has eaten deep into the fabrics of virtually every African country. Three is the problem of government thinking that they don't have business in business, which for me is one of the worst issues. Government is removing its hands in running of businesses. And when they hand over these businesses that government is involved in, those new establishments are involved in reducing jobs because they are much more concerned about profit. So they cut jobs. In the context of the African region, one of the primary responsibilities of government is to provide jobs, because our economic situation is not comparable with what we have in Europe. So if a government that had gone out to campaign to say, we'll create so much job, you follow the campaigns in Nigeria when politicians want to go to office. They tell you in 1 year they will create so much job. Those jobs they are creating are no jobs. When you create jobs, you employ a graduate and you pay 20,000. How do you call that one jobs? So those ones are underemployment. We are faced with that crisis because there is no will, deliberate will developed by political actors who are in government to actually create jobs. And the lack of creation of jobs is adding to the problem of insecurity. is adding to the problem of crime. So there must be a conscious effort to create new jobs. There must be conscious effort to improve on the problem of employment generation, underemployment, and so on and so forth.
No work, no pay. I know that NASU during the NEC conference made its position on that, but what methods do you think can be adopted by all stakeholders to ensure industrial harmony?
Let me say with due sense of responsibility that the trade union movement is made up of people who are sane. That's number one. Number two, the trade union movement is not only about the leadership. We have followers. And when you run a very democratic trade union organization, you can't be excessive as a leader. You can't impose decisions. So there must be this understanding that if there will be a strike at all, some of us have gone to the point that we conduct plebiscite of our members. Do we go on strike? Do we not go on strike? And when you have a preponderance, a chunk of your members who said, go on strike, you can't stop that strike. Two is that the employers, in some cases, in our own case, we have the federal government, we have the state government as our employers. Employers must not promise what they cannot do. The major problem here is that government at various levels, in order to stem the tide, maybe temporarily, of a strike, we send low-level personnel to go and negotiate. Personalities or government functionaries that doesn't have the power to commit government. That's one of the biggest crises that we are confronted with. Government don't send the caliber of people they should send, who will have the mandate either of the governor or the president, who will have data of the funding position of government. If Federal Ministry of Finance wants to send somebody to negotiation, that person will not be at the caliber, at the level that understand the financial problem of the federal government. So the tendency will be that whatever that officer decides or contributes at that level can be thrown away by the superiors. But meanwhile, he has already committed the government. That has to be addressed. So you have to find people, those who are going to be in government negotiating team must be people who can have the ear of Mr. President. Before they commit government, they must have the mandate of our number one citizen at the level of the federal and at the state, so that there will be value in that document. And that for me is a big problem, because at the end of the day, when you now have an agreement, it becomes something that is binding on both parties. And at some point, the government will say, no, this is outrageous. We cannot do this. And even if you have a situation where you have an agreement that is outrageous, you can also call for a renegotiation. But in that case, government will no longer be ready to listen, and they just be telling you that agreement cannot be fulfilled. That's one side of it. But it's important for me to state this one. One, strike is not a tea party. Because strike is not a tea party, no trade union leader rush into strike. We don't rush into strike. We can't do it. It's not possible. And that is why when we now were forced into this strike and you just rush with the directive of no work, no pay, you are not likely to arrest the strike. Because it's like deliberately you leave what you ought to have done undone. Then you want to tie the hand of the trade union. It will not work. It will not work. So this idea of you try to stop unions from going on by issuing no work, no pay, is just an attempt to criminalize strike. And when you do that, you are not likely to succeed. Then the last one on this no work, no pay thing. When the president, our president, when he assumed office, we had this issue of no work, no pay in the university. When the president assumed office, he came and said that he will pay 50% of what was owed or what the government of late President Buhari said he wasn't going to pay. That for me is that Mr. President demonstrated that he believed that injustice had been perpetrated. So that was a good heart, showing the president that has a good heart, who believes that that strike cannot be totally called an illegal strike, and that the no work, no pay that was imposed was clearly an injustice. Even though we are not unmindful of the fact that there are a number of elements in government who never liked that decision of Mr. President, but we have to be grateful for that, which we are. It will convey a wrong signal if anybody thinks that we, the unions in the university, did not show gratitude for that. And that will not be the reason why we will now be rushing to go on another strike. No. Now we think that strikes are forced or not because an agreement that's supposed to be negotiated over 10 years ago are not negotiated, just being renegotiated. So we think that government should introduce a new way, deal with issues as they arise, rather than wait until it's too bold to threat or strike.
I think it's a safe place for us to end the conversation. We'll definitely have further conversation as regards industry relations and how the system can be better. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me. My pleasure.
And that's all we can take on today's edition of the program. Join us next week for a fresh edition of the show. I am Sharon Ijason. Thanks for watching, and remember that labor creates wealth.